right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ageless Movement podcast. And I must say, today's a pivotal podcast. So we didn't have one last week because of Active Aging Week and all the craziness associated with it at work. But now we had another successful one. I'm really happy about this year's success because it was during a pandemic. And we were able to successfully do it. And, you know, no hitches, no problems. And we did it virtually. It's crazy. If you'd have asked me that question a year ago, I would have laughed like, what? Do it virtually? Anyway, so that's done. By the way, if you're just tuning in, my name is Scott Lohman.
My name is Sang Pwangak.
If you enjoy the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We're trying to build our channel to a much wider audience. We really enjoy helping people out in their health and wellness, and that's the point of our podcast. Now, you're probably noticing, if you've been watching us, the background is quite a bit different today. And I think it's very fitting, because today we're going to take on, I think, the most controversial, polarizing, I'm running out of words to describe how contentious, there's another one, nutrition is. We're going to talk about nutrition today, but we're not going to talk about all of nutrition because it's just too much. But we are going to talk about something that had really caught on, I would say, about a decade ago, right?
Yeah. With
the regular population. And that is carb depleted diets, or carb depletion, or paleo diets. Yes, diets that consist mostly of protein, fat, and vegetables, very little to no fruit, and no carbs at all in terms of grains or anything like that. So, where do you want to start on this one?
Well, as Scott said, this is a widely debated topic. In fact, we've debated it the whole entire time we've been together.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Only because I myself have tried to figure out, which one to go on. Everybody has a different reason for what they want to do. I want to go to the extreme of basically being mostly vegan, which Scott has talked me out of many times. I've tried going on Scott's diet and soon learned that I cannot be on his diet.
What is my diet?
Mostly, you're more high protein, which I've tried several times.
But I don't eat low carbs.
Right. Well, I mean,
I sort of defy that whole theory.
My pediatrician told me since I was 8 that I probably shouldn't eat as many carbs as he told my mom.
Oh, okay. Well.
So I already knew carbs was not part of my diet.
Didn't want to bring that nightmare up.
So that's how long I've known about not eating carbs.
Okay, yeah.
And I am far from 8.
So, that's a good point. So why don't we do this? Why don't we give people a little bit of background on what carb depletion is, and just sort of a very short historical perspective on it. Now, a lot of people have played around with diets because of their sport. Wrestlers are notorious for, and boxers too, same thing, for trying to make late, changes to their diet so they can make a certain weight. Which I always thought was crazy, because in a performance-driven sport, the last thing you want to do is cut calories before a competition. Like, I don't know how anybody can wrestle an equal or greater opponent with restricted calories. I mean, I couldn't. I'll tell you that right now. Boxing, same way. I mean, you're running around the whole time. You need that energy. So I never quite understood the craziness, the diet craziness, but what oftentimes would happen with boxers, some of them are notoriously eccentric, and my boy Larry can tell you all about that. And what they do is they would have periods of time where they wouldn't train, and then they'd have a fight lined up, and then they'd start training. And see, I always had a different mindset than that. To me, like in football, your hardest training is in the off season. It's not really in the season. Like, if you're starting in the season, too late for you, bro. You're not going to be getting in the game and making plays. That's just reality, right? For most of us, yeah. For some people that are just freaks, yeah, okay, they can do that. But those people are far and few between. Now, my first understanding of extreme diets really came from bodybuilding. I've competed in bodybuilding before. I don't have an extensive past, But I did, for about a 4, 5, 6 year period, I competed. And I meant to compete longer, but I kind of got distracted. I got into other things. But the training stayed consistent. It was just the competition that I didn't get fully, in for more than about maybe 4, 5, 6 years. But what I learned was I was different than most people in terms of diet. And the popular diet that bodybuilders would always do is they would slowly deplete their carbs, a little bit less each day. And then you get to a point where you have a 6 or 7 day period. This is how they used to do it in the 90s. I'm not saying they do this now, but from what I've read, they still do. You get down to where you go 6 or 7 days with no carbs. And I don't know how you get through your workouts, but they do. And they take MCT oil. That's supposed to give them energy. And it's a medium chain triglyceride, so it's a fat. And then the theory behind it is you get real flat. You get really lean, right? Because you don't have any sugar going on in your body and your insulin levels drop dramatically. And then you slowly start to carb up. And the goal is that, you spend 2 weeks carb loading after carb depleting. And of course, you're still training and you're prepping for your bodybuilding contest. And then you just blow up, right? Because the minute your muscles start getting glycogen again, they just blow up. It's amazing. And you still stay really lean for a short period of time. Because what happens is when you keep starving your muscles of carbohydrates and you go for those prolonged periods and then you start carb loading, well, what naturally happens...
That was a deer.
That was a deer. Sorry,
Scott
everyone.
told me that was a human.
We are in a backyard right now, and I thought it was a person. It is a little baby deer, so we're not going to
So
be
cute.
we're not going to be scared of a deer. I thought maybe it was a raccoon or something nasty like
Mountain
that.
lion.
True. Anyway, this must be a weird podcast to watch. Anyway, so the idea behind it is that if you're 2 weeks out and you take 2 weeks to carb load, that you look your absolute best that day. But I got to be honest with you. It's not as simple as it sounds. It's hard to get it right because if you're natural like I was, and I didn't do any steroids, what would happen is you'd lose muscle because it's hard on your body to not eat any carbs. I mean, you need some insulin production to build muscle. It's just part of the process. Generally speaking, you get guys that are on growth hormone and steroids, and they try these diets, and they can maintain their muscle mass to a much higher degree than someone who's natural. And they look amazing. I mean, I don't know if amazing is the right word. They look freakish to look at. Because when they carb load again, they're massive, and they got these teeny waists, and it's really hard to do like that. When you're natural, it's even hard to do when you're on drugs and you're enhanced. It's doubly hard to do when you're natural. So I always kind of shied away from that. So when I prepared for bodybuilding contests, I would just slowly start making changes to my diet. I'd get rid of all the sugar first, all the candy, not that I ate a lot of candy, but sometimes I'd have cookies, or I'd have a lot of burritos and things like that. I would just cut that back dramatically. And I'd start moving from bean and rice burritos to, yes, I used to eat a lot of that when I was bodybuilding. And then I would start moving to chicken and rice, or steak and rice. I'd probably up my protein a bit. I'd have steak at least twice a week, and I'd fit in lean hamburger meat, maybe 2-3 times a week, and chicken would be the rest of my meals with some fish. And I would just increase my vegetables, decrease the amount of food that I'm eating, especially the amount of carbohydrates, and it always worked for me. I would get lean. That was never a problem for me. But I will say I didn't have that crazy hard look that maybe some other guys did, but there's a difference. I was larger on stage than they were. I had a bigger, thicker, muscular body, and they had a leaner, harder body. And it really came down to what you preferred as a judge. Did you want the bigger guy on stage who's lean, or did you want the smaller guy who's just a little bit more shredded, right, because of the diet? And some judges rewarded those guys more. It was really kind of interesting in those days. So that's basically, my history of carb depletion in terms of how I was introduced to it. And I never fully engaged it. So there's your answer. The closest I came to it actually was about maybe 6 years ago. I realized I was a bit too heavy. So I just started cutting back the sugars, of course. I cut back my carbs, especially at night. And I got to the point where my last meal was literally egg whites mixed in with some eggs and a big salad. And it really worked. I went from 206 pounds to a really, I think, a pretty big 188, 190 pounds. So that's how I do it. Now, I want to say one thing before we continue from here. I'm not preaching that everyone should eat the same way. So her and I are really good examples. Genetically, we are worlds apart, literally.
Yep.
She's Thai. I'm mostly Italian, British, Irish, but I've got I got Anatolian in me, and Arab in me, and African in me. And either way, there's a lot more similarities with their diets of all the people I just mentioned what I am versus saying is really pretty close to being homogeneous. I mean, most of your genetics, because you did this 23andMe as well, is mostly Thai.
Yep.
And Thai people are very interesting that they weren't really conquered. They've always been able to maintain their independence, and they've, pretty much had a homogeneous society for a long period of time. And as a result, the only reason why I'm bringing that up is there's a certain way you eat when you're Thai, and there's a certain way you eat when you have a lot of European roots such as I do, and even North African roots like I do. There's a lot of meat in a North African diet. There's a lot more meat in a European diet.
And we found that grains for you, are perfectly fine.
They work for me because we fed ourselves in Europe on grains.
Yep.
If we didn't have grains during those tough times, we would have died, all of us.
Yeah, and for me, in order to lose weight, I have to really scale back on my grains, and I'm super cautious about which grains. And then on top of it, at best, I might have quinoa, but the problem with quinoa is that it is calorie dense.
Yeah, it is. But it's something, again, it goes back to our physiology.
Mm-hmm.
When I eat quinoa, I don't feel like I gain weight. I feel like I get a little leaner. And I know it's a lot of calories. And I learned in my life, calories isn't always the best way to measure your diet. And what I mean is sometimes I'll have a day where I will eat more calories. But here's the thing, quinoa doesn't make you, it's not a simple sugar. It takes a longer time to metabolize. So you're not using as much insulin. And that's the key to being lean as well. That's why for a lot of people, if you increase your plant fat, it really helps you get leaner because it curbs your appetite for one thing. If you're eating nuts and things like that, or just any kind of plant fat, it's a good way. Any kind of fat is going to help with your glucose level. Yeah. But plant fat is really useful that way because you could snack on cashews and things like that, and it's a little bit filling. And the insulin, having to utilize insulin for cashews, it's almost non-existent. Whereas if you eat bread or something like that, the glycemic level is going to be a lot higher. I'm trying to make this simple here and not get tongue-tied and all this stuff.
Yeah, and I think for you, like when you say like you don't watch calories, like for me personally, I felt like I've had to really manage calories because basically my basal metabolic rate is not the number isn't very high. So if I'm looking at doing, let's say 1,300 calories, which most people say that that's not enough, which you and I have had that discussion.
Yeah.
But the problem is, if I go to 1,500 calories, I can't lose weight.
Yeah, but you've had more complicated situations because you've had to pass what I call performative certifications, where you had to lose weight, but you had to be strong.
Right.
Like anyone could just lose weight to lose weight. That's not hard. What's hard is to lose weight and not lose your fitness.
Right.
And stay strong and be able to lift heavy weight. That's what she had to do.
And that's pretty much where I struggle because I need to take in enough calories to still perform to lift weights. So if I want to lift the weights that I'm used to lifting, I have to really manage the calories, and it has to be a good number, or else, like if I just kind of, which I've done in the past, I'm just like, I just have to eat enough to work out. The problem was I was never getting there because I was constantly probably overeating just a little to compensate, because I'm like, I'm going to do a big workout, therefore I'm going to eat big.
Yeah, correct. and that's what kind of fuels your appetite sometimes. And you honestly, you have to eat enough carbs, just enough to get you through your workout. But anything beyond that, and now you're kind of hurting your body composition in that regard.
Right. And like for me, also, like I have a client who's going through this whole carb depletion, and I think a lot of people they get this recommendation because they have some sort of health issue, and I'm guessing it's the medical community that basically is telling them to go no carb, and in order to get their numbers in line, which works if you can get it done. And it happens usually in a short period of time, which is why people really like it. But here's the problem. When you show up to a workout and you're dragging, great, you've lost the weight, but you don't have the muscle that we're used to you having. You don't have the energy. And that's the problem. Like I've had a client who's gone through bariatric surgery, same thing. Try to do a workout and be completely carb depleted, and the workout is next to none. So
yes, and that's something else we need to bring up for somebody who's middle-aged, imagine, who's not in great shape to begin. Well, he's a little more middle-aged than us.
Yes.
Yeah. So somebody and it doesn't really matter. They could even be younger than us. I mean, technically middle-aged is 36 and up. We're a lot older than 36. Yeah. But the point is that what I'm saying is you could take somebody in their late 30s who's in bad shape, or you could take somebody who's, I don't know, 60, 65 and is not in good shape, and then you take their carbs away, and they're not very good from a performative standpoint anyway, from a level of function. And now you're taking carbs away from them, their energies are just going to plummet, their energy levels. So that's something to take into consideration when you're designing diets for people. Not that we really do that, we're not nutritionists, but everyone has to make smart decisions with their nutrition for themselves. And I brought up the differences in people for a reason, because what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for Sang, and what works for Sang probably won't work for me.
Yeah, and we know this because like I've done a whole lot of blood work to kind of make sure things were okay based on all these diet changes. And with paleo diets basically coming to the forefront because of CrossFitters, like I've tried it and I've done the MCT oil, and first thing that shot up in my numbers was the triglycerides, which apparently doesn't happen to most people, but there's a very small percentage which it does.
And you're one of the lucky ones.
I am one of the lucky ones. On top of it, I have a family history of high cholesterol, which should have been a sign, but I thought, oh, everybody else is doing it, let me do it. And then I go check my numbers and realize that as soon as I get off MCT oil, I should be fine. Which I personally, the only reason why I was taking MCT oil was I wanted the benefits of brain health. So that was why I took it. And yeah, it was great, but the flip side was that I was the very small percentage that affected their cholesterol, like the number, I'd never seen a number that high before.
Yeah, it was really ridiculous. And looking at her serum cholesterol levels, they were all over the place. I mean, literally, we got her off the MCT oil, and she went right back to her life and somewhat normal eating. And then it's suddenly, a third of what it was.
It was closer to normal.
Yeah.
I didn't have cholesterol in itself, the whole measurement is a little interesting, but at least I think the values were closer to what they call normal. Whatever normal is these days.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, we could make that a whole nother topic on a podcast
and
as
it
well.
would change all the time.
Yeah, what truly is behind cholesterol levels? Is there really the correlation that we've been told about incidence of heart attacks and strokes and heart disease in general, coronary heart disease? It's probably a lot more complicated than most of us think it is once you take a deep dive into the research. So yeah, it's interesting. So I guess we're at a crossroads now, and we're not going to tell you how to eat because we're not nutritionists.
Everybody's different.
Everyone is different, but we want to give you some ideas about, you know, what's appropriate for what situation. Now, let's take, for instance, somebody who's massively obese to the point of where their health is on the line, and maybe they have a lot of inflammation in their body. Then yeah, you're going to want to do probably a zero carb diet, and you're probably going to want to do that for a long time, because I'm guessing if you weigh 450 pounds or more, you're not doing a lot of exercise. For you, getting out of your bed and walking to the bathroom is probably your exercise at that point. So in extreme cases like that, I would say that particular type of diet, a carb zero diet, would be appropriate, because the goal is to get the weight off. Because until you get the weight off, that individual really can't do anything.
Exercise is so far down the
Yeah, because you can't really, I mean, how are you going to go for a walk in your neighborhood when you can barely get out of a chair? So you definitely have to start with the simple and move to the complex. And in that case, okay, but there's other situations too. We all have an understanding. We've seen Jerry Springer and the woman that can't get out of her room anymore. All right, that's really rare. But let's take, for instance, people that just have inflammatory diseases, right? I know quite a bit of people that have a lot of problems with that, and autoimmune problems and things like that. And for whatever reason, people with autoimmune issues seem to do much better on higher protein, especially animal protein and fat, and zero or low carbs. It seems to work. Now, that doesn't mean the majority of people in these situations should do that, but there are quite a few that have found success with that particular type of diet. And realize there's a lot of extreme diets out there. I don't really, I'm the best example of someone that doesn't have an extreme diet. I don't recommend, for instance, eating zero carbs for the rest of your life. I think you got to find a balance there. There are specific diets, like many of you might have heard or maybe haven't heard of, the all meat diet. Joe Rogan made that diet very popular. He's done it many times, and I don't quite understand why he would do an all meat diet. He's very lean anyway, and he's very muscular. And he tells these stories about how he does cardio for 3 hours, and I'm like, I don't know how that's done.
Most
Eating
of us
a
don't
meat
have
only
that
diet.
kind of time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but for most of us, that's not really an attainable kind of a long-term solution to a diet. But also, I don't think it's healthy, because you're not getting all your antioxidants.
Correct.
You know what I mean? It's like people that, it's just interesting how nutrition's changed so much from this decade to 3 or 4 decades ago. I mean, I remember in the 80s, that was supposed to be the first era of basically engineered nutrition, scientifically engineered nutrition. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, you've probably had scientifically engineered nutrition. So for instance, you're looking at me like, what are you talking about? Margarine, right? Margarine was supposed to be a superfood in the 80s. It was supposed to lower your cholesterol. It was a perfectly engineered form of fat that's supposed to be good for you. But as it turns out, it's actually lethal for you. And now foods, the FDA basically banned it and gave food companies, 5 years to get it out of their products? And they did, thank God. It was causing people to have strokes and heart attacks. That alone was. It was making people's, what was it that was, triglycerides were going up higher. There was something else that was going higher. I think it was making people's LDLs go higher as well.
Yeah, and that's, I think the one thing about all of that is it was one person's study. I can't even remember. Is it Keys?
Might be,
I can't remember whose study it was, and I think it wasn't even, it wasn't a completely truthful study.
Correct.
But yet we totally revamped our food system based on that.
The food pyramid was changed because of that, and the government endorsed it. Right. And we all looked at the food pyramid and said, okay, this is how we're supposed to eat. And it was too much sugar, for one thing. I think that's to this day, I think that's the biggest problem with America's diet.
Mm-hmm.
We eat too much sugar.
We do. Yeah.
Way too much sugar.
I go to Starbucks and I'm always a little freaked out when the kid shows up with a Frappuccino that's about this big.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, I'm a full grown adult and I can't even drink that.
It's tough. And sugar is very enticing. I mean, like, most of the sugar I get comes from dark chocolate, which has a lot of healthy properties. But I must admit, I enjoy my It's. There's no more in my freezer right now.
Thank God.
Yes. But it's tough. I mean, it's so easy to get into the habit of, I'm going to have an It's tonight. And then you start doing it, instead of 1 day a week, you're doing it twice a week, and then 3 and 4 days a week. And that's where you start putting on, unwanted fat, unwanted weight, I should say.
Yeah. And I think, like, when we don't buy it.
Yeah, it's always better.
Well, no, we also tried it basically, if we're going to take in sugar, it is natural and grown with fruits. But the second thing is, if we are really going to go all out, then at least we get it from a natural type source. So we go and get gelato. So, we go to a place where we know that she uses good ingredients. So at least the quality is good and not a whole lot of fillers. So, at best, there's cream and some sugar.
Yeah, but I know what you mean. It's probably organic milk is in that product.
Yep.
It's locally
Natural
sourced.
flavors.
And I'm telling you, if you live in the Bay Area, you got to try gelatia.
Yep.
There's
Palo Alto and San Carlos.
Yeah, Palo Alto, right off of on Lytton Street, which is my favorite street because it bypasses University Avenue. Right? It's my shortcut.
Yes.
And all the locals know that, but everyone else doesn't know, and that's why there's always traffic on University Avenue. Yeah. So that's where it originally opened up. But San Carlos, fortunately, has one on Laurel Street. So you should check it out. If you're going to treat yourself to something with sugar, that's the thing to treat yourself to.
And when we say treat, like, we order, it is called a piccolo, which is a kid size.
You're a little piccolo.
Today is Scott's birthday. I'm pretty sure he's going to get a medium.
I am?
Which
wow.
Which he deserves. He completely deserves. So, but even though we say, like, we go and have gelato, the portion size, it's probably a scoop.
And what I would always encourage people to do, if you have a really good meal, healthy meal, and you go out to dinner someplace, organic foods, that's the time to get gelato. Because just that little bit, when you pretty much full, it's just the perfect nightcap on your meal. It really is. It's amazing.
Yeah. But our goal is always to have it about once a week. So hopefully no more than once a week. And sometimes we go a couple weeks without. But really managing, still getting what we want, but managing, like, the portion and how many times we're having it also.
So anyway, I'm glad this is, if you tuned into this, and you're probably surprised that it's about nutrition, it's not contentious. I think people, especially experts in their field, aren't really doing a service to the consumer right now, because it's just become it's almost like politics, but I think worse.
Yeah. Because
there's no reason to fuss with each other over nutrition, right? Mm-hmm. There really isn't. Everybody needs to eat a certain way to, we all have different fitness goals. We all have different activity levels. Every human being needs to tailor-make their diet for themselves. Yep. And there's a lot of information out there and a lot of knowledgeable people. But I feel like they're so entrenched in their ideologies that we as consumers don't necessarily get the truth. Yep. And I think for future podcasts, I'd definitely like to talk about eating a vegan diet versus eating a, what's the word I'm trying to search for here? I should know.
Carnivore?
Well, no. Carnivore, when you say carnivore nowadays, it means all meat.
Yeah.
Like everything together, eating meat and vegetables and fruit. Omnivore. Thank you. Okay. I couldn't think of that. So, there's a real fight between people that are vegans, between people that are paleo, and then people like me, that are omnivores. it's just like we sit there and we're just like, oh my God, I can't really listen to the discussion sometimes because they're awful. Like I watched Joe Rogan interview, and I wish Steve Wilkes was the guy's name.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one that did that really good movie on a documentary on being a vegan. He evidently tore multiple ligaments at both knees at the same time. He's a mixed martial artist. And there were things in that movie I felt that were, let's just say, less than honest at times. And I wasn't too happy about that. But overall, the movie was really well done. And he came on Joe Rogan, and there was somebody else that was, I guess, not a paleo guy, but definitely a guy that believed in eating lower carbohydrates. And I'll think of his, no, he wasn't keto. I can't remember. Anyway, it was the worst discussion I'd ever seen in Joe Rogan's podcast because they got nowhere. All they did was argue with each other about, like, you know, whether how much B12 Americans should eat. And I remember literally 20 minutes of that podcast was dedicated to Wilkes and the other guy arguing about where we're getting our B12 from. Wilkes was saying that, you know, they feed the cattle B12, which they do. Yeah. And the other guy was saying, well, before we had, you know, industrialized farms, the dirt itself contained B12. Yep. And they literally fought over this for like 20 minutes. Yep. And I quit after I couldn't make it through the whole podcast because of the way they were with each other. And I certainly don't want to create that kind of discussion about nutrition. Yeah. Because I think there's no one size fits all for nutrition. No. And you're going to have to find your way, navigate through this and do your own research. And I really wish the experts in these fields would do a better job of explaining what most Americans and how most Americans should eat.
Yeah. I mean, like I came across this last week where my client's telling me all these people who were doing no carb and how they look great and, you know, this is the way I'm going to do it. That's the problem is genetically, maybe you can't do something like that because, you know, I'm watching like how he's moving and it just isn't happening. Like,
it's true. I have a client too who's older, who's about 72, but she doesn't look 72. She looks about 58. And she has that same problem. So she really shouldn't eat much carbs because I noticed it. Her whole body composition can change in a short period of time if she lets the carbohydrates get out of control. Yeah. It's really interesting. Some people have a really hard time with it. And it's not just tied to your ancestry. She has a lot of European ancestry. But, yeah, she doesn't do well with grains and carbs. You could see it. Yep. I mean, I can casually observe it. And I even see it in her kids. Mm-hmm. When they're eating, when they're not really eating right. Yeah. Their body composition pays for it. And when they are, they look great. Yeah. So it's fascinating. And
it can also, like, you could cycle through and just constantly, like, go back and forth. So I think right now most of us in this pandemic have probably consumed more carbs.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's been tough, and none of us have been able to train optimally during this time. I know I haven't. Yeah. And the interesting thing is I've spent most of my time rehabbing since this pandemic's begun. And since we started our podcasts, that's all I've really been doing. Corrective exercise and body weight stuff. I'm not really training the way I want to train right now. Maybe in about 3 or 4 months I will be, but who knows?
Yeah, up until I took a little break last week, I mean, like, I was actually feeling great. Yeah. I was getting stronger, so I was quite happy. So now I just need to recoup.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to do a reset because, you know, there's certain things I'd love to be doing right now, but I'm just not quite there yet. And I have to go through all the proper prerequisite training and pass those tests before I can really start to pick up the load. And that's just how it is. I mean, I think at any age, you know, some people will tell me, but Scott, you're 50 years old now. And I'm like, I've had these problems my whole life. I've had periods in my 20s where I should have done more corrective exercise and just taken more time in that area and spent 6 months doing that. instead of trying to, really increase my strength dramatically and push the envelope harder and harder. When you do that over time, you get imbalances. It happens. And you have to address those imbalances, because the longer you put it off, the longer it's going to take for you to get back into the proper symmetry that you need. And I don't mean symmetry in terms of what a bodybuilder perceives as symmetry. I mean literally how you move and how you function, and really what the actual functional strength is between your muscle groups, which is really important. So the take-home message today is keep exercising. Don't be down on yourself if you have periods where you're just not functioning at a high level. Just work with what you got right now and figure out what you have to do now to get where you want to go tomorrow or in a month or a year from now. And same thing with diets. We're not all perfect with our diets, but there are changes that we can make. And most of diet and exercise is habits.
Yes.
For most people, it's habits. I already have that habit. It's just burned into me. But some people don't, and I get it. And that's what you should focus on right now.
Yeah. And for me, I notice the more I move, the better my habits are. When I sit a lot and travel, that's when everything just...
Yeah, traveling's the worst for me as well, especially when I have to sit in planes for long periods of time. Just being on a plane will dehydrate you, even when you're drinking water. And it's just tough to be that sedentary. Then you find out where you're tight. You're tighter in some of your muscles than you think you are, especially in your hamstrings and your hips. We're not meant to sit for hours and hours, human beings. We're meant to move. And I always feel it when I sit too long. Definitely. Okay, so the goal today was just to give you some background on what the issues are in nutrition nowadays, whether you want to go more paleo, meaning more animal protein and fat and vegetable and less carbohydrates, less grains, versus somebody who maybe is a vegan and maybe eats more plant fats. Oh, actually, that's another subject. I'm sorry. Just talking about being an omnivore versus being more of a carb zero person.
Yeah, and when I said
that was our goal today.
When I said vegan, I actually should have said more plant-based.
Yes, plant-based is a better way to state it.
But yeah, for me, I was just basically, toying with the idea of not eating as much meat.
Yeah, and that's something I think we should talk about in the future. And in the comment section, if you have some opinions about your diets, if any of you have been on something more of a radical diet, because there are radical diets out there. There's all fruit diets. That sounds absolutely insane to me, but whatever. For some people, if you've done paleo diets, tell us what your experience is in the comment section. Most people do the Mediterranean diet, and that's more of a balanced diet.
Actually, now that I think about it, so we both have done 23andMe, and I did another one. It's I can't remember the exact name, but it was a DNA, related test, and it did kick back a Mediterranean diet suggestion for me, which made sense because it did fit what I was more used to eating, but because we cook together, it becomes a lot harder to do that. But you could get tested. And I mean, I wouldn't take that, for an absolute answer, but it's an idea. It is out there if you're wondering what's good for you. I just know you didn't do it, but had you, I'm going to guess you probably wouldn't have gotten the Mediterranean diet like I did.
It's hard to say. I don't know. It's very confusing because, and this is this is content for future podcasts. But when I was in my 20s, I probably ate a lot more carbs than I eat now. I used to think nothing of it. Coming home, getting a bunch of brown rice, and I just crack open a can of beans, like barbecue beans. Like the whole can I'd throw on the rice and mix it together. And I would eat that as a meal. Now, I probably didn't eat enough vegetables. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and say I didn't eat enough vegetables in my 20s. But I did eat enough fiber, that's for sure. And I reached a point where I couldn't eat that many beans in one meal. It's interesting. Your body changes. And I was really a person that ate probably more carbs than protein in my 20s. And then right when I got into my 30s, things had to shift the other way. And I found I felt a lot better, and my digestive function was a lot better when I ate more protein, more I would say more meat, more animal fat, more animal protein, and less carbohydrates. Not a lot less, but just a little bit less. And that took care of my problems. And it was really an accident more than anything else. And I'll tell that story in the future. That's for future content. But today I really wanted to talk about the issues surrounding low carbohydrate diets, higher meat or higher protein diets. And that's the funny thing, and I tell people all the time, when they want to change, and what should I do? And I always say, oh, clearly, you're eating too many carbs. You can cut your carbs back, but I don't like meat. Don't eat meat. Just eat more eat more plant-based proteins and fats. There's tons of them out there.
Yeah. And that's actually something I've done. And once again, it all comes down to how much you eat.
Yeah.
Because like I tried to add in more plant fat, and I'm like, all of a sudden I'm packing on weight.
Yeah, see, that's the tricky part. You got to find the balance, because what I find when you eat meat, one of the good advantages of it is that you feel full.
Yep.
You don't 2 hours later you're not hungry for most people.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just had like some quinoa and some cinnamon or something like that, oh my goodness. And fruit, you're going to be hungry, and probably, well, quinoa is a bad example, but let's say fruit and yogurt, and something really tasty like that.
Yeah.
That would definitely get you hungry. Brown sugar on top of that would get you hungry probably in an hour and a half.
Yep.
And that's the downside. And that's what happened in the 80s, because they told us not to eat meat. They told us it was bad.
Mm-hmm.
They told us fat was bad. Carbohydrates good. So people ate like massive amounts of sugar thinking it was healthy, and it really wasn't.
Yeah.
Because heart disease got worse in the 80s.
Yep. And with this pandemic, like that's the one thing we're facing now is we're going to have higher incidences of obesity.
Yeah.
So
people aren't moving as much.
Yep.
And the one interesting thing has happened since the pandemic has kicked in. There has been a stronger movement towards organic foods than there's ever been. I mean, it's astounding. I mean, when the whole COVID was running rampant, all the COVID infections were happening in all the meat packing plants, and they had to literally shut them down. Yeah. And all these industrial farms, they have tons and tons of livestock. They had too much of it. They literally were slaughtering animals because they couldn't sell the meat. No one was going to eat it. And then during that time, because of all the things that were happening at these meat packing plants, especially probably more in certain states than others, but I'm sure that it happens in every state, right?
Yep.
People were moving towards locally sourced organic farming. And we're very fortunate in the Bay Area in California because there's a lot of it. We have a house in the valley, and there's a lot of it in the valley. Where we live in Tracy, a lot of grass-fed beef. You see them when you're driving over the Altamont Pass, and they look very happy. They probably don't know what's going to happen to them later.
Well, but that's one thing like I've been looking into a lot. I'm probably going to research it a little bit more for next weekend.
Yeah.
But I mean, even in Texas, they have a place where the animals are all on a reserve, and it's all, I mean, they basically get to live out there about as naturally as possible, without a lot of humans.
And that's the problem, because we put such a premium on profit in literally everything in our society. Mm-hmm. Food, not the least of which is food, right? Mm-hmm. But energy, everything, right? Medical, especially medical. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Don't get me started on that. But yeah, so what inevitably happens is you have a pig farm of 500 pigs in a really small area, because you don't want to buy all this land to just have 500 pigs. Mm-hmm. So what do? You buy a smaller parcel of land and you flood it with 500 pigs, and guess what happens? You literally have this excrement of this pond of excrement, pig excrement, and they live in it. And it's not healthy. It's not healthy for the animals, and it's doubly not healthy for us when we eat it. So what you're seeing now is a movement towards organic farming, reserves where animals aren't all densely packed in one place. It's crazy. And one of the things, Steve Wilkes talked about in his movie, it's coming to me, but I still don't quite have it in my head. What he would do is he would talk about that animals, and I didn't know this, all the animals in the world that are farm animals, not like wild animals, just farm animals, constitute 15% of the world's carbon footprint. And for most of us, we're like, okay, but what does that mean? Well, for comparison, what do you think cars are? And when I say cars, I mean all cars, old cars, new cars, big 3/4 ton diesels, 18-wheelers that blow all that crap in the air, right? 15%. It shocks me. All the cars in the world I would have thought would have been double of what animals are in farms. They're not. They're the same. That was like mind-bending. It's still mind-bending for me right now, as you could tell. So, that's a big thing in the issue. Big issue in the future is maybe having farms with less animals on them. But that means lower profits, right? That means more expensive food for the consumer. There's a lot of things we have to work out as a society in the years to come, because time's running out on us.
Yep.
Things are changing very rapidly in the environment. Whether you believe it or not, it's happening.
And it's a good time to think about
all these issues, right?
All these issues, because it is, that's what our weekend task is, to figure out how we're going to vote. So make sure you get out there and do it.
Yes, wear your mask, wash your hands, send in your ballot if you're in California and you're voting by mail. Please do so. All right, I don't have anything else to add. I feel like I've been a windbag today. All right?
I think we got a lot out today.
All right, everyone. Sorry for the weird animal noises in the background. That was
It's
today.
nice to have animals.
It is. It's nice to have animals, right? Natural,
They're really cute.
wild animals. All right, everyone. Take care. Have a great rest of your weekend. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. If you have comments, opinions, please leave them.
Yeah.
We want to hear. We want to hear. We will address it. All right? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Take care.